Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host at Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Mitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast. We have with us Phil Champagne. He's the compiler of the Book of Satoshi. Welcome to the podcast, Phil.
Well, thank you, Trace.
How did you get into Bitcoin, and what is this Book of Satoshi?
So how did I came up with Bitcoin? Well, just like pretty much a lot of people, the first time I've heard about it, and it was my conversation over a phone call with my cousin who was telling me about it. Or in the first 10 seconds after he's talking, I says, what? I was dismissing this thing. I was, it's like a community paper money would be the equivalent, but just for the internet, But then I started reading a little bit more about it, and wow, I really got interested and intrigued, and the interest grew and decided to learn it from, the first person to teach about it, which was Satoshi himself. So I wanted to read his white paper, and even though I have a background in software engineering, it seemed like a little bit daunting at first. I was, gosh, okay, I'm going to read this. But, actually, it was readable, very well written, so it was nice. But also, I wanted to get a little bit more information from him, and I was curious to advance that. And so I decided to go through all the posting that he's done. And I realized, actually, it was not that easy to do, the way they are crafted, and you end up in somewhere, and then you have to get the context of the conversation of where, in what context he's answering. Sometimes it's feasible, sometimes it's not as much. And that gave me the idea. I guess this is so much a milestone that all of that is going to be really critical. And even more, the idea for the book might not be as much as important if he was still around, and we, just like Linus Torvalds. If, for example, Linus Torvalds was only in the first 2 years of Linux and then went off, the historical context of the teaching of this guy talking about it will have been a little bit more important than if it was just, if he has actually just briefly stayed there. The intrigue is a little bit added to the fact that Satoshi is gone after 2 years, that to get, all the information I'm getting about Bitcoin is always from other people than the creator. So the only way to get it is really through the only post that he's done.
Yeah, go to the source material, because he did make a lot of posts on the bitcointalk.org,
which are supporting.
But it's kind of hard to find them, right?
Yeah.
You got to go there. Yeah. So you've compiled them all. It's in this Book of Satoshi, available on Amazon.com and lots of other places. Two of the main topics in here, is what I think we'll discuss. Page 69, we have a response on 13th of November 2008, and it looks like Satoshi responded, "The proof of work chain is a solution to the Byzantine generals problem, period." Is that a big deal? Does that matter at all?
Well,
you're a software engineer.
Yeah.
Does that matter?
Well, actually, I have to admit, I didn't know about this problem at all. I was not aware. I have actually my degrees in electrical engineering, so I've actually learned software engineering later on in the work, my first early work. But I never came across those things, theoretical concept like that. But I was fascinated by this, and yes, it is. The blockchain in general solves. Or is likely to be solving so many problems that are somewhat derived to this claim that he's making.
And this is the concept of distributed consensus.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and just for the listeners, the general concept of Byzantine general is how two attacking generals can coordinate an attack for a given time of a city. And if only one general's attack, their force will be destroyed, so they need to synchronize the attack. Now, by sending a messenger, which it could be intercepted, killed, whatever. So therefore,
Falsified.
the other general, and so the other general will not be able to know about at the time of the attack, so you need a confirmation, but you need a confirmation of the confirmation of the confirmation of the confirmation. So it's actually interesting to spin off your heads, like actually you really need a confirmation constantly of which the blockchain itself indeed would be a mechanism in which it would be able to solve it.
This is a problem that has vexed computer science, particularly computer networking, for decades.
Yeah.
I mean, this is we need to have this canonical version of reality, you could say. When we're talking about information theory, the blockchain really creates a new fact in terms of information theory, a fact that can't be edited, can't be destroyed or altered. Like that fact exists now in that blockchain. And everybody agrees that fact exists. I mean, that's and it doesn't matter like what any particular individual might think about the fact. The fact stands on its own, and it's mathematically provable. Right? I mean, what do we mean by that? Mathematically provable when we're talking about this applied financial cryptography.
So what I really to add to what you're saying is, before any kind of problem like that, it was always going back to a centralized point, like trust for SSL securities and those certificates. The only thing that has been considered before is a trusted source. You go to there and then they'll be taking care of things. With voting, you have to trust the authorities which you're voting for. That explains why things are weird. And the same thing for everything else, where needed some sort of centralized. Now suddenly you can decentralize, and it will be information that is publicly available. Just like you can look at the Mount Everest, and everybody will agree on its shape by just looking at it. It's a public information that's accessible by anyone with a pair of eyes.
Yeah, I mean, when somebody asserts that the skyscraper is X number of feet tall, I mean, you can get out the ruler and you can measure it. It either is or it isn't.
Yes, that's right. So it's very similar.
Yeah, I mean,
so blockchain is the same thing. It'll be public information accessible to anyone.
And this public information, it's at its very smallest unit. It's just zeros and ones, right? This leads us to another just fascinating discussion this is on page 281, a post by Satoshi on August 27th, 2010. As a thought experiment, imagine there was a base metal as scarce as gold, but with the following properties. 1, boring gray in color. 2, not a good conductor of electricity. 3, not particularly strong, but not ductile or easily malleable either, and not useful for any practical or ornamental purpose. But it has one special magical property. It can be transported over a communications channel. Okay, so without getting too far into that, what does he mean by that? It can be transported over a communications channel. What is a communications channel to begin with? And what's that mean that we can transport this fictional commodity over that communications channel?
Yeah. So what I like so much about Bitcoin is finally we have something that can complement, not replace gold and silver, but complement. Because we always needed another source of actually derivatives on gold and silver whenever we wanted to communicate them over a communication channel, being the internet or wire transfer, anything where a long distance requiring an electronic transfer.
And I mean, way back in the day, we were doing it over the railroad tracks, 150 years ago, like that. Tap, 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 tap. I mean, that's what it meant to send a wire, right? In a telegram. So, I mean, these are communications channels. And
it requires always a derivatives and a trusted party and all that, a bank or something like that.
Yeah, and what you mean by derivatives is if gold is the money, then the gold certificate would be the money substitute.
That's correct.
Right? So that's the derivative you're talking about.
Yes.
What are examples of communications channels?
Well, in our today's world, maybe in the future with Star Trek we'll have subspace channel, but for now we have The internet, obviously, and anything where we have electronic forms. So
I guess to answer my own question, I mean, we've got copper wires and we've got electrical wires and we've got physical communications channels also.
Yeah.
I mean, there's whole areas of OPSEC and COMSEC and IMSEC. We got different forms of emissions that can be used as communications channels. I mean, all of these are different. Well, I guess in IMSEC, for example, there's a potential attack vector on a cold wallet. You could have the cell phone in your pocket that's using the motion sensor, and it could actually derive like what keys you're typing into the keyboard. So it'd be wise, just as part of your OPSEC, to protect your IMSEC, your operational security, to protect your emanation security, which is a subsection of that, to just not have your cell phone in your pocket when you're accessing your cold wallet. Because then there's not that potential recording of data or information that happens there. And so when we're looking at these different communications channels and different ways that we can transmit information, because at its core, like Bitcoin is just information, just these ones and zeros. And so anything that we can transfer ones and zeros over could potentially become this communications channel that he's talking about.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Kind of to finish up his post, he says, if it somehow acquired any value at all for whatever reason, then anyone wanting to transfer wealth over a long distance could buy some, transmit it, and have the recipient sell it. Maybe it could get an initial value circularly, as you've suggested, by people foreseeing its potential usefulness for exchange. I would definitely want some. Maybe collectors, any random reason could spark it. I think the traditional qualifications for money were written with the assumption that there are so many competing objects in the world that are scarce, an object with the automatic bootstrap of intrinsic value will surely win out over those without intrinsic value. But if there were nothing in the world with intrinsic value that could be used as money, only scarce but no intrinsic value, I think people would still take up something. You know, we're talking about when Bitcoin crawled out of this primordial ooze and began being used as a form of currency in the very earliest of the days. Because we use different things for currency now, but they're like Hayek and Mises. They all came up with this regression theorem that traced back why we use our items for money, and they all had a previous use. You know, we traced them back to gold or salt or cows or whatever. But with Bitcoin, it didn't really have this prior use. It's almost as if the information age has inverted these particular theorems. You know, we now have stuff that's being created as money, and then we figure out applications for it, as opposed to things that had applications and then we decided to use it as money. This is pretty exciting, isn't it?
Yes, it's very I went through the same kind of thoughts, series of thoughts when I heard those things, what Mrs. and all that, their framework on the history of how money was come up to being, and you look at how things are with Bitcoin. But it's really serving a major issue. It's like, how can we have something that is not where there's a requirement for a third-party trust or a government money? There was a real need for this, a void, until now.
Yeah, and I had actually published a book in March of 2009, so about 2 months after Bitcoin came out, called The Great Credit Contraction, talking about this massive problem that we've got in the financial system and how it was actually very predictable. Mainly because what has happened is we have corrupted the atomic unit of our entire financial structure. And if our atomic unit is no longer stable or even definable, then how in the world can we build anything with that unit? For example, if our unit for measuring length, if 1 inch equaled 1 foot, which equaled a yard, which equaled undefinable, would it be any surprise that when we're cutting boards or pouring cement or whatever to build skyscrapers, that they're just all lopsided and fall over and crash and hurt people? And yet, under U.S. federal law, Section 31 U.S.C. 5101 through 5118, we define under federal law that $1 is 1 ounce of silver, that $50 is 1 ounce of gold, that's unintelligible because last time I checked, 1 ounce of gold did not equal 50 ounces of silver on the periodic table. And yet we've defined that by law. It's like saying that 1 foot equals 50 feet. I mean, it's just unintelligible. And then we further complicate it because we've got nickels and pennies and quarters and dimes and all these things that also equal dollars, but they've got zinc and copper and everything in them. And then we've also got Federal Reserve notes, which are undefinable. Dr. Edwin Vieira, he has a PhD in chemistry, also a law degree, practices before the U.S. Supreme Court. All these degrees are from Harvard. He's got 4 Harvard degrees. And he's author of Pieces of 8. He's actually raised the issue, what is a dollar? And his answer is, under federal law, it's unintelligible. There is no answer to it. And
self-recursive.
Self-recursive, undefinable. We've got Federal Reserve notes or dollars, but they're not defined as anything. We've got things that are nobody's liability, like gold and silver, that are defined as dollars. Then we've got things that are the central bank's liability defined as dollars. And all of this introduces chaos into the monetary definitions.
The only thing that actually gives some form of stability in the dollar with this old system that is completely screwed up is the fact that the mass believes that it still has a strong foundation, even though it does not. And their price, they're getting paid in dollars. They have to pay taxes in dollars. Everything is so much. If suddenly you had just add one competing currency to the dollar, just, and okay, now suddenly you're allowed to also use gold and silver. It would not take long before the light bulbs light up on all those people.
Well, and that's really what Satoshi's getting at with Bitcoin, isn't it? In the Genesis block. He writes about it in the Genesis block, this issue of counterparty risk.
We got the issue of Cyprus bail-ins. And now I'm thinking it's like the next time we have a big one, even bigger bail-in that is, people will really realize that, well, okay, no matter how much bitching has been done, or even someone was bitching about Bitcoin, you realize that, well, when the banks are closed and the ATM's just restricting $400 per day, suddenly Bitcoin looks very attractive.
Well, and part of what makes Bitcoin so attractive is who actually has it. Right? It's allocated to a particular address in the Bitcoin network that is agreed upon by everybody. And there's this distributed consensus with Byzantine General's problem that everybody agrees that those Bitcoins are in that address. We don't know what's on whose balance sheet. And we don't know who owns what in our current system. We don't know what collateral has been pledged and hypothecated and rehypothecated. I mean, we have these customer segregated funds that get pledged and then loaned, and John Corzine and MF Global and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns, like the list goes on and on and on. And we're not talking little amounts.
Everything is closed up.
Yeah, everything's closed up. There's not a centralized ledger that everybody agrees that that's who owns what.
And at best, the books will be audited by a third party that that you have to trust, that third party. And that's at best. That's when actually they are audited. But I'm curious to know, I've actually wrote an article on Bitcoin Magazine, not sure if you read it, where I was talking about a way to, so Bitcoin right now is 8 or 9 transactions per second, or what's the max? Maybe it can go all the way to 50 transactions per second.
Yeah, but like you've talked about, Bitcoin's extensible. We can keep adding on and building out more usefulness to it.
We can, right now with the network and how things are, they see a difficulty if we go at that credit card level kind of thing.
Right, of course.
So, okay, fine. But the article I was writing that I wrote made the point that if we actually used a Coinbase or other things, and actually they were using a separate blockchain, where they would be taking care of Coinbase and other Bitstamp or whatever things, third party, then at least they'll have a public ledger that is there, even though it's not decentralized. The beauty of it is that every night they will exchange to balance, just like banks were doing this before with gold. And then you will be able to see exactly, okay, I have, this is the Bitcoin I am supposed to have. and they have that amount of Bitcoin total and things like that. So they will be forced, because at least the blockchain will be public ledger, to at least verify there's no fractional reserve banking.
Yeah, or you can at least verify who owns what and know with absolute certainty that those Bitcoins are in that address. Like, I don't necessarily think it's the fractional reserve banking that's the problem, or even fiat currency. The problem gets much more to the heart of our property rights as we define them. And we've defined property rights mainly through legal code. But now with Bitcoin, we're able to lay down and define property rights with software code, with mathematical precision. And then we all have this distributed consensus that that is the property right, that that's how it's currently allocated. And I think that that's a huge, huge innovation and potential application that we're able to make with this blockchain technology, in addition to the thousands of other applications that this can be used for.
Yeah, I understand. Considering that you've got a background in law, I'm sure that you see even more the profound changes of that.
I mean, anytime we need a canonical record of something, whether it's the law, whether it's titles to cars or houses or boats or airplanes or royalties or copyrights or patents, everything.
This way.
Well, of course it's more secure. The proof of work that we talked about, with this Byzantine generals, this proof of work innovation that built on Adam Back's work with Hashcash, it is a whole new way of defining property rights.
One of the typical issues, like, normally with property rights for house or land, it'll be at the courthouse or something.
Why trust the courthouse as ledger?
And then when there's a war in a given city or town or whatever that gets affected, it burns down. Whoops, the record. Now, we don't know actually who owned and what's the record for that plot of land, and everything gets really chaotic after, you've seen it in Portugal in whatever years. Well, and now with the blockchain, no matter what kind of thing that happens, you still have this secured.
Well, and it doesn't even have to be a war. We had the New York Attorney General coming in, and we asked him, like, what are your big main pain points? And he's like, we get 2,000 calls a day with people who can't find the deeds to their houses.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not kidding you. He's like, it's an absolute nightmare. And we saw the problem during the financial crisis with MERS. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to know exactly who owns it, be able to publicly look it up, and any encumbrances on it? And not just with houses, but with securities, with all the central counterparty clearing that we're able to get rid of. No DTCC, which got flooded during Hurricane Sandy. We know exactly who would own and have encumbered any of these assets. So this book, hopefully people can understand what Satoshi's talking about, and it's not just dolphin speak to them, because it's really, really complex, even though on its surface, and I've read the whole thing, even on the surface, you think you understand it, but it is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the applications of this technology. Well, thanks so much. We've had Phil Champagne, compiler of the collected writings of Bitcoin creator Satoshi Nakamoto. It's the Book of Satoshi, available at Amazon.com and plenty of other places. Thanks for being with us, Phil.
Thank you very much, Trace.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share Bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.